ACCE as a coalition partner. Thank you, Angela Chan, who some of you have met just earlier today, who is the president of CCC, for inviting ACCE for being one of the Stronger Together coalition partners in the first place. So I'm Jessie Mom, the chair of the ACCE Social Issues Committee, and I will be your moderator for today. I'm really excited about this panel. It's a great opportunity for us to hear about three very special guests. So we're joined here today by Ms. Leslie Wu, CEO of Civic Action, Ms. Kara Inglis, Consumer and Modern Work PR lead at Microsoft, and Mr. Andrew Au, managing partner of Intercept Group North America. So they're all experts in this discipline of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. And without further ado, I would like to welcome each panelist to tell us a little bit about yourself and your DEI journey.
Awesome. So maybe Jessie, I can kick us off there. So yeah, so I'm Andrew. I co-founded a tech marketing company called Intercept. We work a lot with the big tech brands in the US and Canada. My journey with ACCE started last year. I was one of the award winners, and I've recently joined the board as well to support. So that's a bit about my background, and just in terms of my connection with diversity, equity, inclusion. I think as a business leader, it is a huge part of my role. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm here to make sure that everyone feels their best so they can do their best work, right? And I think it's probably even more important today when you think about everybody's looking to innovate faster and transform faster. And I think, my philosophy in this is that diversity is a key enabler of that. And so anyways, it's a topic that I've been close to right throughout university. Being part of Inroads, which is an organization that promotes diversity within corporate America and corporate Canada. But yeah, that's just a little bit about me. So maybe I can pass it over to Leslie.
Thanks so much, Andrew, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be part. I'm very excited about this conversation. So I bring a background. I'm trained as an architect and an urban planner, and I bring to the table the background around city building and change making. And in my professional life, it's always been my experience that change can only happen when we have all the voices around the table, and whether it is in urban planning issues or, I spent a lot of time at Metrolinx on infrastructure issues, getting projects done. The more you're able to sit from the multiple perspectives, inevitably the solutions are always better. And so that's kind of the beginning of my interest in DEI, but in many respects, I have a lived experience of DEI, also being a woman of color in an industry that is primarily engineers and male dominated. And now I have the fortune of leading the organization Civic Action, where at its very, very essence, we are about connecting private, public, not-for-profit sectors, different industries in an effort to co-create and collaborate on large urban challenges. And we very much are focused on issues of inclusion and which is part of creating inclusive cities. And we are very focused on leadership and the importance of having giving emerging and rising leaders the ability to lead and a voice at the table, and also on the importance of the economy being inclusive so that equity deserving communities have as much opportunity as they can to benefit for all, both private and public investments. And so I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to Kara.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. So my name is Kara Inglis. I'm the consumer and modern work PR lead at Microsoft Canada. I've been with Microsoft for almost a decade now, and so I really come to this conversation from the perspective of a communications professional and how we look at storytelling, and that, the fundamental belief is that everything that we do should be inclusive and represent our broader community of employees, customers, as well as partners. So in everything that I do, both internally and externally, I ensure that DEI is a thread that spans all of that. And then I think I sit kind of in between Andrew and in between Leslie in terms of lived experiences. around DE&I. So excited to jump into the conversation.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your introduction. So, when we talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and intersectionality, what do we really mean by this? And how do these concepts interrelate?
Maybe I can start there, Jesse. And, we talk about the case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm just going to throw out a few little stats just so we can, and then I'm going to break it down a little bit. But so McKinsey in 2019 did quite a lot of research internationally, specifically on first gender and then ethnicity and cultural diversity. And for companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on their executive teams, they were 25% more likely to have above average profitability. And that's up from 2017, where it was about 21%. And then on the dimension of ethnic and cultural diversity, in that same study, in the top quartile of companies, they outperformed those in the fourth by 36% in profitability. So that's slightly up from 2017, indicating that the likelihood of outperformance continues to be higher for diversity in ethnicity relative to gender. And another little quick tidbit, just basically saying the same thing, is the Goldman Sachs study that was done last year, where at least one diverse board member in the U.S. companies that had at least one diverse board member saw a 44% jump in their average share price within a year of going public. So diversity definitely has a correlation directly to your success on that dimension, but it's true that the progress has been really, really slow, and that's what the data is showing. So when we say DEI, what do we mean? For me, diversity is about representation. So it's like, do we have all the voices that need to be around the table, or enough diversity of voices that we're not sort of talking in an echo chamber, and whether that's at the leadership level, the management level, or at the staff level. And so that is one dimension and one step forward, and it has a correlation to performance. The second piece, which is when you take things one step further, which is around equity and equity of opportunity, which means you need to have a degree of transparency about how decisions are made. You're able to dismantle bias in your processes and your protocols. And in essence, what that leads to is more trust. And so you're able to both internally in your organization and externally to the rest of your clients and the public, emulate a sense of fairness and trust, and that actually oftentimes leads to stronger loyalty to brand, loyalty to your company. The third piece is just the next step again, which is around inclusion. And that's where, as an organization, as a city, as a company, your citizens, your employees, your clients believe that their uniqueness is being valued. And that leads to, if we use the instance of a company, an employee experience that is attractive for a broader range of the labor force, and the ability then and it's really important that you sort of measure these dimensions, because it's one way of really truly gleaning out employee satisfaction. And Jesse asked about intersectionality. These three things cross over into each other on so many different scales. And so I think when we think about the business case for DE&I, it's pretty clear. And so the bigger question is, why is it taking so long? Why is the change a management for organizations? Why is it that we can't read the data and move in that direction?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Leslie, just to build on that, I think it's interesting when you quantify the impact, right? Because I think as business leaders, I'm sure DE&I is important to everybody as a value, but I think being able to quantify business impact is also important. But I think it's also, in addition to that short-term gain or economic gain, you think about the benefits, how it compounds over time. And that's how when I look at it, it's like you're seeing this improved culture, as you mentioned, the improved resilience, the improved creativity, like all of that, I think culminates together. So I think especially now, when you think about the time that we're living in, where it's this constant change, marketplace change, workplace change, and it's getting faster, right? And I think it was Trudeau that said, change has never been this fast, but it's also never going to be this slow again. So I think it's really just fascinating, the accelerated pace, and I think it's mission critical, especially during times of change. So I think great points, and I think you've laid a really good foundation for just really defining what is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Kara, do you have any comments?
No, I think Andrew and Leslie both covered it really well. I think the only piece I would add is around employees, and that what we've seen, even just through the pandemic alone, that it really has been a time where people have gained voice and gained ownership over different topics in different areas that they want to see developed within their current organization or in an organization that they want to go to. So I think, building on the business case around it, it's yes, leaders need to implement, but also we need to ensure that we're listening to our employees and what they're looking for and the values and the cultures that our organizations are either creating or not creating, and thus leading to what could be the Great Resignation.
Yeah. So I think, all of you have laid a very good foundation for what DEI is. And as Leslie mentioned, the slow has been a little bit slow. In the last decade or two, we've seen organizations really have made a commitment towards DEI, but it's still a slow change. Many organizations have a very multi-ethnic, multicultural, and generational workforce. But we see a lot of organizations just stopping there and remaining stagnant. So my question is, where do we go from here? What can we do to be more engaged with our diverse teams and to continue to attract and retain these diverse teams?
Maybe I could pick up on where Kara left off around employee experience, because I think she's bang on. I think that is so critical today. And I think when you look at the pandemic, and one of the things that it has done is it's really shifted the spotlight from customer experience to employee experience. And I'm not saying that customers aren't important, but I think that this is a much needed shift, because we've always talked about customers, about using data to predict their needs and to deliver personalized experiences, right, to get them to buy more and support them and drive loyalty. Well, when have we really ever talked about employees in the same way? And frankly, to me, I think this is very refreshing to see that really happen for the first time in many cases, interestingly, in some companies. So, well, what does that mean? I think we need to think about what are the things that we need to rethink as leaders. And it's right down to processes, how we run our operations. And there was a company, there's a bank called ANZ, which is a multinational bank, but it's out of Australia. And so one of the things that they looked at is how do we create more diversity within our recruitment practices. So what they did is they actually first built a data model based on characteristics of high performance people in the organization. It's just, what are the core characteristics, what are the values and traits, behavioral traits that they exhibit. They created this data model, and they took this data model and they put it into these sort of templated games that will test your cognitive ability. So rather than asking people to submit a resume, they got them to play these games, which would take like 2 or 3 minutes. And what was interesting, I mean, yes, novel that they're doing gameplay instead of resumes. But what's interesting is that the recruitment manager, the project manager, could not see their name, could not see their ethnicity or their education. It was purely based on a cognitive ability. And that wasn't the determining factor, but it was one of the sort of criteria to move on to the next phase. So I think that was, I think we could look at technology as a way to rethink our processes in that way. And how do we create more diversity? I think the other thing is structures and sort of legacy structures that we've had. And I was moderating an Inroads panel, which is the organization I mentioned earlier. And one of the current students, and they're placed in very high performance roles, business to engineering to science, etc. Very, very bright group. And one of the students said, why do I went to this internship. Why am I sort of siloed into the Hispanic club? Like, why do I have to belong to these culture specific clubs? Like, that's not really diversity to me. And I think that, that really got everybody perked up at that point, because I think all of these efforts are intended to create more diversity, but in some cases we need to rethink, are they creating more silos, or are they actually breaking down silos? So I think structures is important, and then just communications. I think just making sure that there's more fluid communication across senior people, junior people, departments, team members, etc. So anyway, in this whole rant, if we are to harness this full power of diverse perspectives, we have to rethink how we do things. It cannot just be a return to business. You have to rethink it. Is a thought.
Maybe I'll just add to Andrew's point, which is basically, people ask, well, we've done this, we added more people on our board, our senior management, we have more women, and it's not working. And I was like, when you think you've done one thing, it's never enough. It's from top to bottom, end to end. So, whether it is in your hiring practices, simple things, it seems simple at this point, but it's not. Language. We have a program called Hire Next to help employers remove barriers for young people just by a job description. We tend to require qualifications way beyond what is necessary, because we're all searching for the superhuman employee, and truly not necessary. So we bar out some folks, and then we don't value lived experience when we're looking for jobs. So just how people get in, and then once you're in you get your foot in the door, the ability to really progress in your career. And I think the data is something like over 70% of vacancies are filled in Canada are filled through network. Someone referred you, someone you heard about it in some way or the other. There's all those jobs that are available and nobody ever posts. And so mentorship and sponsorship within an organization is really, really critical, or even within and outside of an organization for staff, and particularly for racialized employees and women and young people. And then the third thing I would say is that the power, we should never underestimate the power of a connection. I don't know, like just even, we have a program called Civic Match. We take Indigenous, Black, and racialized rising leaders, and we connect them to a CEO of some large corporation. Many of these young people that we work with in our network, they come from families that don't have someone who's in some more senior position. Their parents don't have the network that would allow you to say, go talk to so-and-so if you're interested in preparing for an interview. And so I think organizations, institutions can do so much more to help create these little bridges that are just gaps in the kind of life cycle in your career.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think it comes down to also managers and how we're supporting managers and having them rethink some of the learned behaviors that they might have adopted throughout their experience in the workplace. And even just like an anecdote from our cybersecurity team, cybersecurity is largely a male dominated space. They're looking for computer science, that sort of background. And some of our leaders have really diversified the way that they look at the industry, but also the talent pool that's coming in. We're looking beyond computer science. We're looking at people who bring a unique perspective from unique backgrounds and unique education that helps to make the world safer more broadly. But it's the individual leaders that are taking it upon themselves to say, what we've been doing is maybe not the right thing for us. Let's try something else. And I think that's something that we want all of our leaders to do and all of our managers to do across different lines of business. So that's another piece where there's always work to be done, and I think there's always opportunity to challenge the way that we may have been doing things or the way that we've structured ERGs or other things. Well,
I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Leslie.
No, I was just going to say it. I mean, the data shows as a human species, frankly, we are all somewhat anti-diversity because we're tribal, right?
Mhm.
And we like to hang out with people like ourselves. It's not natural. It's I'm going to say this in a weird way. It's somewhat unnatural, and so to be in an environment and to create a culture that is diverse and inclusive, of the full range of everything. All of us carry some sort of bias, unconscious bias in some way, shape, or the other.
Mhm.
So we're always sort of pushing against that. And so it's really important to be we have to work at it. It's not gonna, if we sit around and we won't get there.
Yeah, it's a great point. I was just going to say, building on what both of you said is doing things differently and looking for new traits and different backgrounds. And it reminds me, my daughter was she's getting into this sort of acting realm, and she's auditioning and all that, and she reads all the auditions and she says, but it's asking for all this experience. And I said, yeah. And she said, but what happens, like, how do you get the first one? Because I don't have experience. And so I think it's interesting, right? Like when the point made around like this long laundry list of all these requirements may not be necessary, right? We may need to rethink that. And something that we talked about before was just, beginner's mindset versus expert mindset. I think we need more beginners today, because if you look at a lot of the experts, you see things, or they'll see things in very sort of tunnel vision, but we have to solve new problems. So we need different minds around the table if we're really going to be truly creative, right? So it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. So I know Leslie and Andrew, you both kind of touched upon this concept of unconscious bias. So my question is, what exactly is unconscious bias? It's very subtle. I mean, obviously we know what racism is, we know what discrimination is, right? But what can we do to tackle unconscious bias within an organization and harness that?
Yeah, go ahead, Leslie.
No, I was going to say, I think I would first be careful. Unconscious bias doesn't equal racism. And for anybody who wants to kind of know Harvard has a little assessment test for folks, your unconscious bias against it could be race, could be gender. They have one for, are you fat bias? Are you skinny bias? And so we all have these biases, and if anyone ever tells you they have no bias, then they're not, you can call them on it. But I think the thing is that it is all about being self-aware. And so knowing we're raised in a certain way, our parents put in our brains and in our environment and our neighborhoods where we grew up, it plays into it. And some of it is really, really good, and some of it not so much. And so I think being as self-aware as we humanly can, but I think it's really important to not say that one necessarily equates the other. And in an organization, if you say we have unconscious bias and we're doing unconscious bias training, that doesn't mean you're addressing racism. They're a whole different kind of kettle of fish, and so always be careful about what that is, because unconscious bias can lead to racism, but not necessarily.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think at the end of the day, Leslie, you kind of touched on this with sort of the similar to me effect, or we look for people that are similar. We have that tendency. I think that how we overcome it, I mean, just my example with ANZ in looking at how, ways that technology can help us sort of overcome some of the cognitive bias that we have and the limitations that we have, I think is one route. I think the risk of that, though, obviously, is that, and and Carrie, you'll know this better than anyone on the tech side, is that if you've got biased data going in, you will get a perpetuating biased outcome or result. And so I think it's important to keep, there's bias in human decision making, but also in data as well. And so I think it's sort of a two-sided thing of how do we be aware of it and how do we mitigate it, both on the data and the human side.
Yeah, I think at Microsoft, you know, we've been on a culture journey. We've talked a lot about it publicly, as well as internally. And the big thing for us is really the growth mindset. So similar to beginner mindset, we are constantly evolving and learning. And some of that includes looking at the things that we've done poorly, or, you know, where we could improve, and opportunities and or gaps that we've seen. And not to put the onus on employees to call us out as an organization, but employees calling us out does allow us to understand what has been happening and how do we better ourselves. And that's something that, you know, it's not always clean. It's sometimes a very messy process, but we're, as an organization, very transparent about what we want to work on, how we need to get there, and then pulling in resources, like everybody come in and help us better understand some of the areas that we could be better at. And all of this is, you know, a really great goal. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, I think, for businesses to be that transparent about the flaws or the gaps that we have, because we all want to, you know, show how great we are. And we say it on paper, but it's how we act and what we're doing tangibly through action and our policy to really make those changes. And I think that's something that we really look at and we really strive to do. But of course, it does display some of the things that we don't necessarily want to display.
You know, Kara. Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
I was just going to say, you know, I think that Kara touched on a really important point, is that we need to stop chasing perfection. I think what we need to be chasing is progress, is this continual progress, and not benchmarking our companies against others, is benchmarking our companies against itself. Where were we 30 days ago? Where were we 90 days ago? Where were we a year ago? And I think just being very transparent that, hey, we're not going to be perfect, but we can make progress and continue to make progress. I think that's key. And I think that's, again, I mean, Microsoft's sort of a modern day case study of sort of culture transformation. You know, a lot of people talk about it today and I think that they were, as Kara said, very transparent and committed to progress. And I think that that's what incents risk taking and innovation. It's very different than when you are aiming for perfect. Sorry, Leslie.
Yeah, no, I was just going to follow up on Kara's point about, you know, these are, it's hard to do. And I think the more you can create an environment where it's okay to have tough conversations, that it's, you know, an environment where no one would want to say the word racism, and they're afraid of it. And I think we have to be able to create a space where you can have these difficult conversations, because in absence of that, you'll find people doing what I think for a lot of my career, I would say I was code switching all the time, just to kind of fit in, because you're trying to filter and screen your true self, because it didn't seem like, because it was going to be too uncomfortable to kind of have a countervailing view or a different perspective, or say something in a different tone of voice, or and so we shut down the full talent of everybody who could be in the room. And I so the kind of culture that we create in the workplace, or, you know, whether it's private or the public sector or in the not-for-profit sector, and not all tough conversations have to happen in a big open forum, and that the fact that someone can walk in a door and say, you know, that made me feel really uncomfortable, and you're like, okay, I'm really sorry, let's talk it through. How should we, what? But that is not, I mean, there are companies that don't even, like, well, people don't stay there that long often when that's the case.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely rings true to a lot of us. Like, even for myself, you know, especially when I was starting out in my career, I was, you know, always afraid to sort of stir up the status quo, so to speak. So I guess that's kind of a lead into my next question is, you know, how do we individuals find a happy medium where each one of us can demonstrate our individuality, but at the same time respecting other people's norms?
Yeah, so I'll start there. And I think it really builds on your point, Leslie, about being your authentic self. And that's something that we really value as a company at Microsoft. And, as, a racial woman of color, like I've gone into many workplaces where people have made comments and I've felt very uncomfortable. And I've not, just to your point, Leslie, I've reverted back and tried all the things to make myself not stand out in a particular way. And I think at Microsoft, we've been very clear over the past few years that we want to create a culture where everybody feels like they can bring their true selves to the workplace. And we know that from the business case study, that allows us to, create more revenue and people are more productive and all of those things. But as a culture, it really empowers us to really embrace everyone, see where everyone's strengths are, learn from each other, and we create what we call psychologically safe spaces. And again, the pandemic, I think, really opened our eyes to the priority around this and ensuring that everyone has the space and the environment to be their authentic selves, to ask the questions, to maybe challenge us on our behaviors and allow us to grow as an organization. And we have to do this in partnership with our employees at the same time. And, blanketed on everything is communicating what we are doing and what we're trying to do and the journey that we're on. And I think we've all made it really clear that diversity, inclusion, equity, and accessibility are not destinations. They really are a journey. And every organization is constantly learning and iterating on how do we get there and how do we get better. And we're getting better because it's for our people and the work that we're trying to do. So there's, so many different ways to look at it. But ultimately for us, it's really how do we show that we are inclusive? And so beyond just saying it, what are the actions that we are taking? And then how do we ensure that every employee feels safe? And if they don't feel safe, what do we need to do better? So again, it's a little bit of finding people who will be vocal and will champion what we want to say and what we want to demonstrate, but also help us navigate where there are those gaps and work to address it. So I think we are lucky in that we have people within our company that are really true champions and willing to be vocal, and they then set the stage for others to have those conversations with their managers, better understand, or again, if something comes up like, unconscious bias, there are many employees that will ask, well, why does that matter? And then that starts that conversation. And again, it's really just about learning and growing. And, in a company as large as Microsoft, you'd kind of think like, oh, you guys are just saying it because you have to say it. But internally, in the nearly 10 years that I've been with the company, there's been a huge shift in the way that we looked at DE&I, and now we really see it and we embody it in every employee, and every person comes with this shared vision and purpose that we didn't necessarily have before. So I think we're on this growth mindset journey, and it's enabling us to be more diverse because of our employees and because of the culture that we're trying to create.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's such a really good model for companies of how do you do this transformation right, and how do you really build the right culture. And I think it's, to your point, Kara, it's like, what are the right principles that we need to apply in the organization versus, I think we're very a rule-driven society. I think in a lot of cases we need fewer rules and more principles, because principles is what allows people to bring individuality and flexibility, but still be united by, a core set of values. And I think that's, for us, as an organization, we've got four. We abbreviate as RISE, so risk-taking, initiative, support, and effort. And so everyone can come from a different background and have different communication styles and different relationships with technologies, different ethnicities, again, different education. But what unites us is this common set of values. So it's finding what brings people together, what connects people, but then what also allows them to be individuals, and how do you allow for flexibility?
I think, Andrew, what you're saying is particularly prescient for the 2020, 2021. And the reason I say that is because how many large organizations are now trying to make sure they understand their purpose. How many people are searching for purpose? And, you know, in the not-for-profit sector, this is not unfamiliar. Not-for-profit sector generally is very purpose-driven, but now more than ever, if you don't have a clear purpose to which individual employees can sort of see how their uniqueness can be directed towards that, and you know, their skills, their uniqueness directed towards that purpose, it's not enough. It's just not enough. So even if you're able to kind of feel like I'm coming my true self to work, but I don't understand how my true self fits in with your purpose, that disconnect, I think maybe 5-10 years ago, it would have been, people would have kind of figured it out. I think the pandemic has shown that everybody wants to do valued work that is pointing, you know, we've had this, the great resignation is about everyone finding purpose in my mind. And so you know, in the work I do, I deal with a lot of young rising leaders, and it's remarkable and fascinating because they are unencumbered about the status quo that they want to change, and they feel that, and so they are very purpose driven. And when they enter an organization that can articulate its purpose, they basically turn around and walk out the door and go find someone else who is. And so I think purpose and values have become for us in 2020, 21 and going forward, one of the key indicators of our ability to be successful.
Mm-hmm. So, so Kara, you mentioned, you know, that DEI is a journey, and it, you know, we should always be looking to improve ourselves and make progress. You know, to make progress, you know, we always like to benchmark ourselves. So my question is, how can organizations track their progress and measure their progress in advancing a more sort of diverse and inclusive workplace? And, you know, do you think these metrics are helpful or harmful?
Yeah, well, at Microsoft, we've now been issuing a diversity and inclusion report every year, and by no means is it, you know, we've done a great job, here it is, but it's a very transparent reflection of our evolution and where we want to go and the perspectives that we're taking in as we get there. And so we know, you know, in any large corporation, you're striving to have a workforce that is diverse and they match certain archetypes of what diversity means. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to demonstrate that we are making the right steps in the right direction and learning from the right people. So, you know, we often share some of the organizations that we partner with internationally as well as in Canada. And then we bring that internally. We have a lot of think tanks around how do we get better and how do we constantly demonstrate this. And again, you know, I think especially based on my role, communication is pivotal in ensuring that people are along for the ride and that it's not just the top down implementing changes based on some rules or some metrics that they need to achieve, but that everybody from the bottom up and in between are included in that and part of that decision making. And, you know, I think all of that compounded with all the data and all the trends that we've seen around the workforce, particularly in the pandemic, you know, it's very true that employees want to have a voice, they want to have a say, and they want to be a part of the company that they work for and really pushing those changes. So again, a little bit of a rant, but, you know, we release this report. Again, it's not necessarily going to demonstrate how great we are, but it is a transparent move to showing the world that we are on this journey and that we're committed to this journey. And that just, again, reiterates that we are trying. And that's, at the end of the day, organizations just need to try. And that's the first step.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just add on this whole notion of tracking and measuring progress. I think for a lot of organizations, it's a scary thing. Like gathering the data. So here it is, you know, you're an organization, if you truly want to gather information about your organization, you're going to start asking questions about sexual orientation. You're going to ask questions about disability. You're going to ask questions about race and ethnicity, language, And I know that it's not, for some organizations, it's a bridge too far. They feel it's an invasion of people's privacy. And so it's a very touchy issue to gather the data, to really know where you're doing. And so you rely a lot on self-identification. So, and how people identify themselves. But if in fact we can progress to a place where this is less of a taboo, I'll use the example during the pandemic where the Toronto Public Health started collecting race-based data around cases of COVID. And it was because of that, they were able to triage and focus where they wanted to put their limited resources and energy to begin to curb the pandemic itself. So it's very, very powerful if you're able to do that. I know Stats Canada is now finally beginning to collect more granular disaggregated data on ethnicity and so forth, right? It's no longer just this big lump called visible minorities. And so I think part of our progress for ourselves is beginning to be comfortable to collect that, data that maybe historically we thought was not that critical to our success.
Yeah, and I'll just add on. I think it's metrics are directional. I think they are important because it offers insight, as you just mentioned. I think it's an indication of priority, as Kara was kind of alluding to. But the challenge, I think it shouldn't be the end all and be all. I think a good measure is ultimately asking, your employees, how do you feel? And I think if you're doing these surveys, you're doing these check-ins regularly to understand, real-time feedback and sentiment and identify opportunities for improvement. I think that's already a big step. So again, I think metrics are important. But I don't think we need to be as rigid on, hey, here's sort of the checkbox of, we need certain ratios. And honestly, that's one of the questions that we often get, south of the border, which is like, what's your background? Because there's a metric to meet from a procurement standpoint. So it's an interesting conversation over, is it good or bad, or how far we should take metrics? But I think there's a limit to how effective metrics can be.
Yeah, well, it seems like it's all part of the journey. And, a lot of organizations seem to think, well, DEI seems like a really long journey. I don't know if I really want to get myself involved or how long this journey is going to be. So, my question is, how can each one of us do individually or even through our organization promote DEI, even in small steps within our community?
Yeah, I think building on what has been a constant theme in the last question is around self-ID. And so, for us, so at Microsoft, we recently launched a platform called Microsoft Stories. And Stories doesn't necessarily marry to any of our business priorities. It doesn't really drive, our products or solutions, but it is really meant to celebrate the real humans and the heartfelt stories of employees, customers, and partners. And it gives them this platform to, in some ways, identify themselves and share their journeys, whether it's related to skilling, race, accessibility, or what have you. And, I think broadly, the sentiment of it is to ensure that everybody understands the people that make up the fabric of our company, but also the way that we want to move around the world and the way that we want to empower other people. And it's about these individuals and the lives that they've had and the lived experiences that they have that make up, what we believe to be an incredible company. And, I'm the biggest company cheerleader when it comes to it, but also, selfishly, I use these platforms to share individual stories, and I share my own individual story on my platform as a way to empower others. And I think the more that we can do, the more, and again, it's a sensitive topic because not everyone wants to self-identify and not everyone wants to talk about the vulnerable or the seemingly vulnerable areas of their lives, but it is so powerful. We've seen a lot of great thought leadership come from it. We've seen a lot of talent attraction as well as retention. And then we also, the biggest thing for me is being able to empower others to share more. And the more that we all talk about how we really feel, what's really happening in our lives, the more we can move toward positive change and really creating a place full of meaningful work and meaningful people that are willing to come to work. A little bit of a soapbox there, but
It's a beautiful soapbox, Kara. Maybe Jesse, just to the question of individual, what can individuals do? I think, for anyone who is in a leadership position or anyone who, has a microphone or a somewhere where you're talking, I think, invite other voices to the table. I think, and so that's one. Whether it's in a meeting room or in, you're going to an event, reach out to someone in the organization or someone who might not have access to that kind of networking event or whatever it is. And I think the other thing is, try to find opportunities to listen and hear and learn different. And what I mean by different, could anything different, in the sense that to broaden the understanding and perspectives that we all have our own, and carrying that forward in the work we do and everything. That's what sponsorship is about. That's what mentorship is about. It's when we we have events that spotlight talent, when we sort of spend time with individuals in your organization or in your group that they just need a sounding board. And I think so. I think individually everybody can play it doesn't have to be a big grand, poster board act. It can be a very intimate act, actually.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think when I think about Kara's comments around the storytelling piece, I think that's really important today, because I think that we need to show that companies are not these faceless, cold entities, right? There's people and culture and journeys and stories and all that behind them. And so I think sharing these stories are just really important to help, communicate the culture as an organization to the community and spread that goodness. I think the point too Leslie made around mentorship, I think is key. I think reverse mentorship programs, we're a big advocate of that. I think so reverse mentorship, where the traditional mentorship is you've got senior people that are mentoring the younger people coming into the organization, the workforce. Reverse mentorship is just in reverse order. So you've got the new people that are mentoring the executives on different topics. I think that also, just from a one-to-one connection standpoint, and in a way that's not so from top down, but it's sort of bottom up, is another way I think that you can create more connection, more meaningful connection, and help people feel just more comfortable in the organization and included. So just a couple points on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, those are all great ideas. Thank you very much. So that's actually the last of my questions. We do have a few minutes, actually, if I can reach out to the audience to see if they have any questions for our panel speakers. If you'd like, you can actually type your question into the chat box. Does anyone have any questions? No, well, sounds like you are all very informative. Oh,
There's one.
yes. So the question from Andy Shea is, what could you do if your CEO is not really interested?
Ooh, good one.
Great question. Do you want to go, Andrew?
I think that in most cases, where we see pushback on this from sort of the C-suite, right, from that CEO position, is not from a position of they don't believe in it. It's that they don't know how to do it, and it's frustrating, and it's easier to just say it's not important or we're not going to prioritize it. I think that the C-suite now is having to pay more attention to the broader employee base because of things like Great Resignation, where you have 40% of people that are thinking about leaving their job, right, this year. And so I think that it's triggered that alert light to them, so they're a little bit more they're paying attention to it closer than they probably have been before. So I think that as a employee base, I think you should be advocates of that. And there's that sort of that groundswell, right? If everybody's having these conversations, that ladders up to management and up through to executives. I think it becomes a point where the volume is so loud that the CEO has to care about it. So I think that continuing to advocate for it is the best way to just apply increasing pressure. But again, I think, and my perspective, I don't think it's a lack of willingness. It's a lack of understanding how. How do I measure it? How do I do it? What's the timeline? All these executional pieces that I think can just frustrate people, and they just turn away from it.
I have two suggestions, just quickly. One is, so there's power by title and power by influence. And in an organization where the person with the title is not, the CEO and unable to or is resisting, I say it's kind of similar to Andrew. You need to build your coalition and basically do what you can through the influence that you can glean with, at whatever level you're operating. That's number one. And then I think number two, which is a harder thing to do, but maybe not so much in 2021, if there's not a values alignment with the organization, you have to ask yourself, is this the right place for me? Right? After you've done your best and because life is too short and we all have finite amount of energy that we want to exert, and if we want to leave this place better than we found it, you have to make a call about how much energy you want to invest in it. So anyway, that's
funny. I would have said similar to your second point, Leslie, like I'd be out of there. There are, data studies that demonstrate the business value in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, I mean, for the CEO that maybe is not open to it because they don't want to try, here's a reason why you should try. If you want to increase your business, you want to retain your talent, you want to attract more talent and grow, there are all the reasons why. And if at that point still no, then probably not a great organization to be at.
It's interesting though, because there's when I hear, like, there's a lot of organizations that have they're stuck in that legacy mode. And so it's interesting to hear that, because I think it probably happens more often than we might think of meeting that resistance, right, at that level.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, is a bit of a sad reality. We have another question from Jeffrey Sheck in the chat box here. He says, please speak on how to go about it from the other side. An Asian business that started as a family business that needs to attract mainstream, bracket white, bracket talent.
I think the principles of what we just discussed would still apply, but it's an interesting question. I don't think I've ever heard that question before.
Yeah, it's I think you go back to like things that you're rethinking is maybe when you think about recruitment practices, right? Are we going to sort of the same sources that where we might be getting sort of similar type of candidate, versus opening that up, like broadening the recruitment strategy and using platforms, like I mentioned around, where you're not seeing candidates' name and ethnicity and education and so forth, and you're making decisions more based on just pure ability. And also job descriptions. I think Leslie, you mentioned that as well. Depends on how we also position the employment opportunity. So I think it's if we maybe look at the recruitment practice, and this is maybe a good place to start, evaluate it at sort of each part of that, and see if we may have any kind of unconscious bias that we kind of talked about that has been kind of seeded in that may be deterring other people that we would want to work for us. So I think taking another look at it, maybe even having somebody, you mentioned it in a family business, an external person, an outsider, to look at that process after you sort of collect it. This is what it kind of looks like from start to finish, from job description through to onboarding. And it'd be interesting to see what they say. You know, are we only appealing to a certain type of candidate? Maybe. It's a really good question.
And I think we had a question from Mary Chong, who raised her hand.
Hi, thanks very much to the panel. It's been very insightful. I might be the oldest person on this call, having retired from IBM and started up my own business. But over 20 years ago, I was director of skills for IBM and also championed the Women Technology Initiative, as well as being on the Diversity Council. So this is definitely a long journey, but I want to point out the comment made by Andrew, which is really based on a company's principles on how they manage that will make the change. Because if you're managing based on rise or, instead of effort being performance, right, and output, and you have your flexibility in all of your policies to support that, then you will be able to address all of the varying needs that you didn't even know were out there. So for example, whether it's for moms to employees with disabilities that need to work in chunks of time, not necessarily core hours, right? So as long as you have the infrastructure to support communications and the flexibility to policies to support any situation, and you measure by performance, then those who should rise above to be the cream of the crop should get noticed. So that's just one point. But this question though for your comment is, of course, over my 30, 40 years now in looking at corporate world as a living laboratory and seeing the results and having been privileged to be around the executive table, etc. It still kind of frustrates me to see that whenever I look in the globe, for example, and I see the graduating class, right, whether it's MBA or Masters of Finance, etc., the representation of that class is never represented in the C-suite. So whether you have comments on what really does need to be done, because the pipeline is not getting there. We build a pipeline, but they're not reaching the potential. Would like your comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And so we have time for one last question. That's in the chat box over here by Andy Shea, which is, can you comment on the Stop campaign at the Law Society of Ontario?
Maybe just, Jesse, I just want to address Mary's comment. It's interesting. You raise a really good point, because you look at the C-suite and it is not representative of today's diversity. And my thought goes to, and again, I think this is an outdated stat at this point, but around 50% or 52% of the Fortune 500 since year 2000 is turned over. And I think that what we're seeing right now is that there's a major shift in power, where the largest companies could always win because they were the biggest. And I think that today, agility really is the new currency of business. We're seeing companies like, Shopify as an example, right, which was the most valuable company in Canada. Which, when you think about that, I mean, less than 10 years or so, or 10 years in the most valuable company in Canada. I think the Fortune 500 is going to look a lot different in the next 5 or 10 years. And I think it's going to be a lot on these mid-market companies that are coming up and setting new standards where they're more agile. They have more modern values. They've got more modern technology. And I think it's really the largest companies, unless they start to really get serious about their transformation journey culturally, they will be part of that statistic of companies that have turned over. So it's a great comment. It's something that we talk about a lot. Diversity and whether that's reflecting the C-suite. So
Andrew, are you saying that pipeline that Mary's referring to, they're just going to leave the company and go to those more agile companies in any event?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think that's how the change is going to happen. It's not going to be sitting there waiting for their turn at the top of the triangle.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much. So unfortunately, I think that's all the time we have for today. So thank you so much to all the panelists for taking your time out and to answer all our questions and to speak with us and provide us with your different perspectives and also experiences. So I think the pandemic has really illuminated some of the issues that you've highlighted today, and this is a great time for us to unlock the potential of people and to build a stronger business and a stronger community as well through diversity and inclusion. So this ends our webinar for today. For those of you who do have suggestions or feedback about some other topics that you might want to hear more about in our programs, feel free to reach out to Karen Ng at ACCE. And also, if you have any feedback, feel free to provide that in the chat box as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Have a good night.
Bye.